There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Bookmania. Welcome back to my channel and to another Friday Reads. Here it is, 7:15. I just didn't quite have the gumption to get out and risk freezing my butt off. It's only about plus 12. That's usually about the cutoff for whether I'm willing to go out and film outdoors. It's going to warm up later, but I don't have time later, so here we are. Breaking news. I found out about this on one of my very most favorite Canadian news programs. It has been going since about 1970, I think. It's called As It Happens. One of the original hosts was Barbara Frum, and I credit Barbara Frum, the late Barbara Frum, for getting me into news when I was, I don't know, well, if I started listening I think I started listening before I was even out of elementary school. I would listen to it after supper. It started at 6:30, and she was the interviewer, and Alan Maitland was the announcer that announced each guest, and they did that for many years. She is David Frum's mother, so we won't hold that against her. Both of her kids, she was very private about her politics, but I don't think Barbara Frum was a right-wing person, but both of her kids were. Her daughter is a conservative senator at the moment, and David Frum has acquitted himself somewhat through his fierce opposition to Trump during that sad era, but he's still pretty much of a jerk. But I loved Barbara Frum, and she died so young. She was only about 50 or something when she kept it a secret that she had leukemia all those years and just suddenly dropped dead at the height of her TV career. And I have been a guest on As It Happens. She was still alive. She was still on the Nationals, what was it called? Her show on the National? Her TV show. She was on the TV show, but I was interviewed on her former radio show when I was in my 20s as a gay rights activist. They mispronounced my last name, but I was on there. This is quite a little digression, but I hope it's been of interest. Let me have a sip of coffee to get my brain kicked into gear here. There we go. So, I think they do this interview every year. There is a book prize called the Bookseller Diagram Prize for the oddest book title of the year. And I don't know what the diagram is. The diagram the name of a publisher? I can't remember. But anyway, it's just a fun book prize that I'm not going to read the long list, but I'm going to read you the titles on the long list. So they choose the oddest book title. Most of these titles come from academia, but not all. So here is I don't know if it's the short list or the long list. And if I can find book covers, I will put them up. First of all, we have Curves for the Mathematically Curious by Julian Havel. Next, Handbook of Research on Health and Environmental Benefits of Camel Products. I don't know if that book was released on Hump Day or not. That's by Omar Amin Alhaj, Bernard Fay, and Rajendra Prasad Agrawal, the editors. Next, Hats, A Very Unnatural History by Malcolm Smith. And this one might be my favorite to win this year. It's a serious study of a comic book icon's Jewish influences, and the title is Superman Circumcised? By Roy Schwartz. Inquiring minds want to know. And next we have The Life Cycle of Russian Things, From Fish Guts to Fabergé. And the editors are Romaniello, Smith, and Starks. And finally, Miss I Don't Give a Shit, Engaging with Challenging Behavior in Schools by Adele Bates. My. They all have a certain charm, but I'm going with Is Superman Circumcised? If you have any opinions, please leave comments below. Last year was the first time a Canadian publisher, the award goes to the publisher. Last year, the winner is the first time a Canadian publisher has ever won the prize. And it's a book by a University of Alberta anthropologist, Gregory Forth. The title is A Dog Pissing at the Edge of a Path, Animal Metaphors in Eastern Indonesian Society. Anybody want to buddy read that? All right.
Weekly Highlights.
I have things to say. It was a fantastic 5-star read. It was incredibly illuminating, and the main thing that I want to say at the outset, and then I want to figure out how not to let this completely overtake my review, is that it was actually literally enraging. And
everyone's been chomping at the bit for her to have a new novel out, and Oh Beautiful, I don't think is going to disappoint anyone. You know how Shelter started off with such a impactful opening. Oh Beautiful has another really impactful opening that immediately gets you into the character of the story.
I've had an interesting reading week, lots to say. Let's get going. I made a decision last week that I was really happy with, that I just cut out talking about what books I'm going to start in the coming week. If I'm too chatty about the other stuff, I think that's the one that you just have to wait another week. So I'll just put the book covers up to save time at the end, and we'll see if that's what happens again this week. But I don't have any bails, and I have finished 4. I started this weeks and weeks ago, and I have finally finished this short story collection, Blue in Chicago by Bette Howland. She died just a few years ago, but most of her stuff was published. Well, she received a MacArthur Fellowship in 1984 and never published anything further in her lifetime. So I don't know if these stories, I didn't bother to read the afterword, so I don't know if these stories were written more recently or not. They felt like they might have been written in the 70s and 80s, but I don't know. And to be honest, I don't really care. I didn't really enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars. There was 2 stories in here that were excellent, or maybe 3, and the rest of them were just kind of not excellent. Most of these stories read like pretty good essays, but there didn't seem to be much of a story in them. I don't need a lot of stuff to happen in my fiction, but there is, it's just I have a feeling when something that I'm reading is an essay or whether it's fiction, and too many of these felt like essays, and so I was not engaged by those stories particularly. She wrote so well about very difficult parent-child, especially mother-daughter relationships, adult daughter with their elderly mother, and there was a couple, or even grandmothers and their granddaughters, that those stories really stood out. She was a great writer, and a memoir of her time in a mental health institution has just come out more recently and is supposed to be amazing, but she wasn't really for me. My biggest beef with this book is, and I seem to be bringing this up every week now, I couldn't see those page numbers. I had to guess what page to update my Goodreads because the print was so small. So, Jesus. Most of them were set in Chicago, and definitely a real sense of place. She seemed like an uncomfortable white person, and I squirmed at some of the stuff about race in Chicago from the perspective of a young white woman in the 70s and 80s, but I think I squirmed once or twice. So I finished this Swedish novel, The Family Clause by Jonas, Hassen, Khemiri. From a Tunisian father and a Swedish mother, and has lived his whole life, as far as I understand it, in Sweden. So there's nowhere that I saw him referred to as a Tunisian Swedish writer, but if you're wondering at the name, that's where his name comes from. This was an absolute delight, and while it was not a perfect novel, the things I loved so much that I had absolutely no trouble overlooking things that didn't work so well, that I gave it 5 passionate stars. It's a family drama, and you know what? I think I'm going to review it, so what do I want to tell you here? I just finished it yesterday, and I'm still carrying the story in my body, so this is the perfect kind of book for me to just turn on the recorder later tonight or tomorrow and make a review. Just some really tender, sweet moments about a refreshingly modern family where the dad is doing paternity leave and the mom, the lawyer, is out working her ass off, and he's having all the issues that you have with a 1-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. And he's just going out of his mind, and I think it was an autobiographical character. By the end, I could really feel that this was an autobiographical novel. Just really tender, really funny moments. I had so much fun quoting lengthy passages that were, beautiful and funny and tender on Instagram and Twitter and so on. And as I said when I mentioned this weeks ago, nobody is named, and everybody is described by their familiar role. For example, a father who has become a grandfather. We never hear anybody's names. or a daughter who will soon be a mother. Like, those were the references. That got a little bit tedious and hard to follow. It took me quite a long time to figure out how many of the stay-at-home dads, how many sisters the stay-at-home dad had. I'm not even quite confident that I got it figured out by the end, but that did not detract from just sinking into this really touching and at times very, very comedic family drama. I will read anything else this man writes. Stay tuned for my review. And unfortunately, this novel went off the rails by the end. Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. I think I gave it 3 stars. Because I found the ending was really strong. I really liked the ending. But this was, I like a sprawling, loose, baggy monster of a novel, but this one was ridiculous by the end. I just lost the thread of it because she kept introducing characters and then 17 chapters later bringing those characters who had just been incredibly minor characters earlier and giving them their own storyline, and that's why it got to be 589 pages. It was just a bloated monstrosity. So it's the dual timeline thing, which is getting really old. Am I the only one that's getting really sick of dual timelines? I always end up caring so much more about one of the stories than the other, and in this one, that was from the get-go. But I still thought it might be a solid 4-star read. So the modern timeline is the actor in Hollywood. Jesus. Fiction about Hollywood actors should be banned by international treaty. Can they add that on to the climate change? Because my blood boils when I have to read about stupid actors. I hate reading about actors. And thankfully, that was about, I would say, at most a fifth of the story, but my eyes glazed over whenever we went to the modern timeline, although there was interesting stuff about her falling into what she could understand and what she could find out about the pilot from the 1930s and 40s, the one who disappeared, Marion, whatever her name was. But her love life and Hollywood scandals just gagged me with a spoon. But I really enjoyed most of the story about Marion Graves, especially when she was younger, and the writing was, for the most part, really good. By about 2/3 of the way, I started to feel that the character work left a fair amount to be desired, to be honest. So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she does get married, and the characterization of that man, by the end, I was just sick. I just thought she botched it. Like, his character didn't cohere, and I found most of the other characters not satisfyingly drawn, but Marion herself was a really fascinating character, and I surprisingly absolutely loved the descriptions of flying. It was my favorite part of the book, and that is a big focus, but she kept going on and on about all these other characters, and I'm not going to do a full review. I'm nattering enough about it right in here. But the other thing that drove me crazy by the end, Britta, I think I might have, in a Voxer message, said you might enjoy this, but I think this thing that I thought was a major failing would drive you crazy, because it started driving me crazy. The women were so independent, but the narrative was so preoccupied with their love lives and their sex lives. Most people do have sex drives and want a relationship, but it got jarring. The amount of space that was devoted to her relationships. Again, I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm a very relationship-oriented person in my fiction, but she just went way overboard, and I just didn't care. Just like I didn't care about the present-day Hollywood actors' love life. I didn't give a fuck. Why? Who cares? But by the end, that started to become a real problem. And, this could have been an excellent 300 or 400-page novel, but the fact that it was almost 600 pages with all this stupid stuff in it, the best I could do was 3 stars. I would still be interested to see what Maggie Shipstead does. Maybe not next, but maybe 1 or 2 novels after that. I would like to check her out because there was a lot of evidence of literary talent here, and sadly, a lot of evidence of needing a better editor and some more discipline. Rein yourself in, Maggie. And finally, saving the best to last, well, another really excellent book that I finished was Nishga by Jordan Abel. I think I was calling him Abel last week. Sometimes I get my pronunciation all bent out of shape. I loved this. 5 stars. I think I'm going to review it. So I'll just say here that it really worked for me on so many levels. There was a lot of intellectually challenging cultural theory from an indigenous perspective, and what made it really work for me was my intellect gets engaged when I am also emotionally engaged, and this was the perfect blend of those two, and I just fell in love with Jordan Abel. I just saw on Twitter last night that his first novel is coming out, but not until 2023. I want to read all his poetry, and the poetry that he talks about at length in this book. I want to go look that up and study it, because I found it quite a challenge to get my head around. But what a powerful narrative just made of various texts and the things that he does with text, and the way he explores his indigenous identity as someone who didn't grow up among the Nishga family and was raised by his white mother, and talking about residential school intergenerational trauma in a way that just was extremely moving and very intellectually engaging. What an incredible book. I loved it, and I'm going to try to review it, so stay tuned. So those are what I finished. I have started 3. Also for Indigathon, I have got a good start on the memoir by the Métis writer who is from Saskatchewan, Maria Campbell, and her novel that was originally published, I believe, in the 70s, Halfbreed. And I am doing this as an audio text combo, which I really recommend to people because Maria Campbell's audio narration is just marvelous. She wrote it, I think, like I said, in the 70s, but her publisher refused to print the chapter where she described being raped by a police officer. So the new reissue, which just came out 2 years ago, restores that chapter, and that's the one that I am buddy reading with Heidi of My Reading Life. She's a great writer, and her story, being raised as a, what were they called? Not the ditch people, but her family, like many Métis families in that part of Saskatchewan, the road allowance people. They got kicked off their farm because they weren't able to meet the homesteading requirements, and they ended up living along with many Métis families on the public land between private property and the road, like basically as far as I can understand it, in the ditch. She had a very colorful childhood, and it's powerful. I'm loving it so far. The other one, and I've just got a bare start, I've got my reading cut out for me this weekend. This is the Buddy Read with Sonia of an enthusiastic reader, Edna O'Brien's memoir from 2012, Country Girl. Oh, how many times have you heard me announce a bail on a memoir and talk about the fact that I just don't get along with most memoir? Well, this is one of those fabulous exceptions. Edna O'Brien could write a grocery list and I would give it 5 stars. I mean, she just is such an amazing writer, and she started writing this memoir when she was 78. She's now 90, or maybe soon to be 91, and oh my God, it's fascinating to trace the biographical roots of so many recurring themes in her story, certainly about her parents and the farm that she grew up on in rinky-dink in small-town Ireland, and all of those things are jumping out at me, but most of all, I feel like I'm reading fiction. I mean, that's how good it is. And it's not me. That's the thing I can't stand about memoir. Whether it's illness memoir or anything like that, that me, first-person voice often makes me want to retch. It's the exact opposite visceral reaction when it's Edna O'Brien. I love her. She is the goddess. I'm so glad I have so much more of this left to read, and still so much more of Edna O'Brien's oeuvre left to read, and she's still cranking them out. And oh God, I don't know what to say about this. I have read 30 pages of this Paraguayan novel, I the Supreme, by Augusto Roa Bastos, translated from the Spanish by, isn't it by my mother, Helen Lane? Is that right? Is this the one? Yeah, Helen Lane. That's my mom's name and her family, her maiden name, as they say. I still haven't asked her if she has a secret literary career that I didn't know about, but if she does, boy, do I respect her, because this is an amazing work in English translation. And Roz, who is recovering very well, by the way, was very curious to see what I would make of this, and it sounded like I don't remember how long ago she read it, but she's still trying to figure out what she made of it, and so that really raises the bar for me, because if Roz has trouble finding the words to talk about it, it's hopeless that I would ever be able to do so. But this is about a 19th century Paraguayan dictator. I believe that he's a fictional creation, Dr. Francia, and his secretary and only companion. There are no quotation marks, which I love. And the banter between these two, well, it starts out with his secretary, a man, finding, what's the word that was new to me? Pasquinade. Is that how you pronounce it? Or Pasquinade? A satirical text nailed to the palace, the door of his house or somewhere. And this piece of satirical writing, and he's the dictator, is, I, the supreme dictator of the Republic, order that on the occasion of my death, my corpse be decapitated, my head placed on a pike for 3 days in the Plaza de la Repubblica, to which the people are to be summoned by the sounding of a full peal of bells. All my civil and military servants are to be hanged. Their corpses are to be buried in pastures outside the walls, with neither cross nor mark to commemorate their names. At the end of the aforementioned period, I ordered that my remains be burned and my ashes thrown into the river. ... And so his right-hand man, Policarpo Patino, brings this into him, and all hell breaks loose. And it's comedic, it is densely written, and all kinds of... my God, I don't know, I haven't got a clue how to talk about it, but I am absolutely gripped by it. My December will be mostly devoted to finishing up some big, challenging reads. This is one. Clarissa is another, and things like that. And I'm going to have a blast just sinking deeply into this novel that doesn't sound at all like a Sean book, and it may not end up being a Sean book, but the first 30 pages, which just knock my socks off. This is incredible. Well, I haven't gone on too long. I guess I can tell you about the books I'm going to start next week. So I finished 4, and I have 4 left on my Indigathon. So those are the ones I'm going to start. I won't say too much about each one, but this middle grade novel, Fatty Legs, by Christy Jordan-Fenton and her late mother-in-law, Margaret-Olemaun Pokiak-Fenton, about residential schools. This is going to be... I will be shocked if this is anything other than fabulous. Should I tell you? Yes, I'm going to tell you. I did a bite-sized book chat with Christy Jordan-Fenton. Stay tuned. And this work of Métis history, The Identities of Marie Rose Delorme Smith, Portrait of a Métis Woman, 1861 to 1960. I have since found out that this scholar's second book, Doris Jean MacKinnon is the author, and I have just recently found out that her second book is actually kind of an expansion on this, where she pairs this biography with another Métis woman's biography in one volume. And I thought, well, should I just read that one instead, which I could get fairly reasonably on ebook? But this is only 116 pages, and the new book is more than double that length. So no, I'm going to stick with this, and then if I'm curious, I will go on and try the expanded work later. The Indigenous novel from New Zealand, Potiki by Patricia Grace. It's very short. Looking forward to starting that. And the collection of Aboriginal Australian short fiction, Born Into This by Adam Thompson, which I think I'm doing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm doing it as an audio-text combo. So really excited about all of those. And now I got to dash out the door. So that's what I got this week. What do you think? Thanks for watching.